Whereas other people are saying technology is going to destroy things and everything's going to blow up. I go, yeah, but the same mechanism within our minds that allows us to create the technology may very well help us to fuse between our body and our soul this connection from the micro to the macro, and we may innovate ourselves to evolve as fast as the technology does. So I look forward to that, and hope.
Hello, folks. I just want to do a quick introduction to this particular interview that I did with Jonny Dupre, with Sterling Lujan, and Bob Podolsky. I think it's really some exciting stuff, and I hope you enjoy it. We cover quite a few issues. I've broken it into two parts. So the first part is a couple questions I asked, and then we get into a third question. But some really valuable and helpful information. And it's all about human potential, something that I think we need to be talking about a great deal more. I want to welcome our audience to another in the series of the Anarchapulco 24/7, 365 community interview series. And today we've got some really special guests, and we're going to talk about something really I think is important and something that we should be talking about a lot more, and that's, the ability and our pursuit of human potential. And so with that said, our three guests today are Bob Podolsky, Jonny Dupre, and Sterling Lujan. And each of you guys, to me, have, actually I was interviewing David Rodriguez just recently, and something he said really resonated with me. He said that the secret to happiness is freedom, and the secret to freedom is courage. And if there's anything that embodies you guys in my mind, it's courage. Each of you have demonstrated a great deal of courage. And so I'll just start off and ask you to each introduce yourself. So Sterling, you want to start?
I'd be more than happy to. So my name's Sterling Lujan. I am a voluntarist anarchist. I created the relational anarchist school of thought. I've built up a page on Facebook that was called Psychological Anarchist before it was censored by Fascist Book. I'm currently working in the cryptocurrency space and the digital marketing space. So I'm helping companies, specifically companies that are interested in changing the dominant paradigm toward greater freedom. I'm helping them iron out a marketing strategy and get behind the psychology of why people want more freedom, more prosperity, more dignity, more decency.
How about you, Jonny?
My name is Jonny Dupre. I am a psychosocial coach and trainer. I specialize in unconscious communication. I've got a various number of certifications, from conflict resolution all the way to charisma coaching and hypnotherapy, NLP master practitioner. And what I specialize in is wanting to bridge or fuse the gap between what one's potential is and where they find themselves to be right now in whatever intention or outcome they aim at. So I specialize in executive coaching and hopes of being able to fuse both psychology and sociology inside of someone's consciousness in order for them to be able to have the freedom of choice in whichever path they want to take in their lives.
Awesome. And Bob?
Well, my name is Bob Podolsky, and I was a physicist, and I became a psychotherapist, and I've studied 15 different kinds of psychotherapy, and I'm very well-versed in things like NLP and Ericksonian hypnosis, and I've been practicing for 45 years and have been putting together a synthesis of different methodologies for increasing human awareness and creating ethical societies. I spent 17 years with John David Garcia and a small group of friends who engaged in 17 years of experimental research on how to form ethical societies. And I bring all of that knowledge to this group, and I'm here to change the world just like you guys are.
Awesome. Yeah, and you know, that's kind of the idea behind this series, as a matter of fact, as far as the interview series goes, is demonstrating how voluntarism really works, and the people in the community, and how they're actually, you know, embodying the philosophy and actually doing things that work, that change people's minds and help people move on and proceed. And certainly one of the things that is greatly underutilized is human potential. You know, in the current system as we have it, in the current paradigm, as people practice it, is incredibly poor, I think, in realizing human potential. So my first question is for you guys is, what are the psychological human weaknesses being exploited in the current paradigm? Which ones are the worst in your opinion, and which ones are the ones that most people are falling victim to? So I'll go to Johnny this time. Johnny, you can start off.
First off, that's a phenomenal question to ask, and a profoundly deep one that could probably take us 6 days of nonstop discussion over some really good wine to get to the bottom of. But I am going to say this, that for me, I would say the greatest of human weaknesses is that of ignorance, which is there is only so much an individual knows and can be privy to in any given moment in time. So we judge our experience and rate our experience and interpret our experience based on our experiences. So until someone introduces our awareness or our consciousness to an idea, whether it's to a concept, to a principle, to an idea, we are essentially stuck inside of the context of that experience, which means that we will operate and create the entire breadth, width, and depth of belief and our connection to reality based on what it is we know. Well, if you are designed or placed into a system that is institutionalized ignorance, you're only going to be able to go as far with your consciousness and your awareness as they have allowed. So for me, that is in conjunction with what we've identified in neurosciences as the cognitive biases, which is our natural tendency towards certainty. For me, that's a natural weakness, because what you think you're certain of then creates a conclusion. And a conclusion is just an answer to a question that you don't even have the full information you need in order to ask. So if you run into these multitude of cognitive biases, you will assess your reality and the context by which you live in that reality based on those biases, based on the information that's been given to you, or in this case, not given to you. And so as a result, you can close your mind down and say, I already know that, or I've already learned that, or I already have that, which means you're no longer open in your experience to finding out all that you don't know that you could. Which means that if you are attempting to volunteer for something, if you only perceive two options because those two options are the only two options you've ever been made aware of, then the only two things you perceive you can volunteer for are those two things. In my field, we call this a bind. You're literally bound by these imperceptible options you didn't even know you were capable of experiencing. And so for me, that is the greatest of human weaknesses, is all that we don't know that we could.
All right, Bob, how about you? What's your response to that question?
Well, I have to agree that ignorance is a profoundly dangerous weakness. I would drill down into that a little bit more specifically and say that the greatest piece of that is what we don't know about ourselves. That self-knowledge is a huge issue, and it comes about because we learn certain defensive behaviors very early in life. When we're infants and toddlers, we develop character structures which are defensive in nature, and they keep us from knowing who we are. And if you don't know who you are, you cannot be honest with the people around you, and that is a vulnerability that the current regime takes advantage of all the time. So that basically is my answer. As to which of those is the worst, which was part of the question, there are four, what's the word for it? It's four paradigmatic character structures that are very, very prevalent. And the one of them that I think is the worst is what I call the hungry character structure. Clinicians call it the oral character structure. And it's basically based on starvation. It's the idea that I'm in a world where I'm going to starve if I'm not really careful because everything I need is scarce. And this is the underlying psychological foundation of socialism and communism. And today, in today's world, those malformed ideas are the most destructive that we have operating on a large scale. Socialism and communism come from infantile hunger and the experience of being starved almost to death. So I think that this is the single worst of the weaknesses that we have as a society, that our society is being overrun with people who are subject to this particular form of character structure. I hope that's the kind of answer you were looking for.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Sterling, how about you? What would be your answer?
Yeah, first I want to say I 100% agree with these gentlemen, and drilling down to the individual level is extremely important. I think I'm going to take a higher level approach and look at the human species sort of as a whole. But I want to say this first, that these guys are right, because this is what Socrates talked about early on, right? The only thing that I know for sure is my own ignorance. And then, of course, he used that idea to develop the Socratic method to help not only get himself to think, but to get other people to think and to come to terms with who they are and try to understand more about the world they live in and their surrounding and their ecosystem. So here's one of the big problems. If people don't explore that ignorance, if they don't come to understand their character and who they are, and then learn more about themselves and the world and try to be more open-minded, what they're going to be susceptible to is, in psychology, what's been referred to as groupthink, right? So when we have a large society that's embedded in a groupthink mentality, it puts us into a mindset of what Charles Tart called the consensus trance. I talk about this a lot in my public speeches. The consensus trance is this state of waking delusion, being in this comatose mindset where you can't connect with other people because you have no clue who you are, and all you're doing is falling prey to the toxicity of culture. Terence McKenna talked about this a lot with this idea that culture is not your friend. And it's not your friend because a lot of people get embedded in this consensus trance, this self-delusion where they just kind of amble through life without knowing really what's going on around them. And I think one of the key results of this groupthink and this consensus trance is that people go along with and agree to engage in atrocities. The Stanford Prison Experiment, some of these other experiments that have been conducted that show how obedient people can be to authority. So if we don't learn to wake up like these individuals are talking about, using different methods of meditation, self-exploration, psychedelics, etc., then we're going to revel in our own ignorance and then just follow cultural trends no matter how harmful, how toxic, and how dangerous they are. So my whole goal to help people wake up from this consensus trance was to talk about what it would be like to actually try to connect with other people on a compassionate and dignified level. What would it be like to figure out what other people actually want out of lives? What if we used what Marshall Rosenberg called nonviolent communication and actually tried to assess other people's needs? If we can do that, we can come to terms with other people, we can learn that maybe what we want and what society at large want can be shifted in a way that makes sense, where we're meeting everyone's needs in a way that creates a situation where we don't resort to violence or systemic violence, as is the nature of the current society. And there's a lot of other issues that play into this. The groupthink model is especially and horrendously applied to children, right? As children grow up into the society, their brains are in a developmental and formative stage. And when they're in this particular stage, their minds are easily warped to fit into culture and to engage in and then to become involved in the consensus trance. We have to try to get people out of that and be more compassionate. We have to try to connect with people, but we also have to talk to people about truth and reality, and then help them come to terms with that ignorance and realize that they're here now, they have being, and that they exist. And I think that's important because that's what allows you to question the status quo. And that's what happened to me after I took MDMA.
Just to get a little more specific, because I heard a lot of things that relate to, some of the things that you see in society today, and like, for example, sarcasm. I don't know what you guys feel about sarcasm, but I think it reflects on, I think the amount of sarcasm reflects on a great deal of kind of fear and distrust amongst people in general. And then some of the other trends, like people going to superhero movies as a reflection of their inability to control their own life. I don't know, what do you guys think about some of the actual things that are going on in the world that kind of reflect on people's mentality and their weaknesses? Go ahead, anybody.
I think that's a whole lot of implications. Like there's a whole lot of illogical, or what we call pseudological, leaps there. For me, the stories of heroes date back. I mean, Joseph Campbell's done work in cultural anthropology talking about the nature of heroes for time immemorial. Like, as soon as we could create the written word or pass story from orally from one generation to the next, we told stories of guides and heroes as a sign of humanity's, in my opinion, humanity's desire to evolve. Its desire to grow, its desire to continue solving problems, its desire to do more, be more, become more. And so that we have a tendency to create these archetypical imagery around a hero, whether that's masculine or feminine or neither, in order to give ourselves something to aspire to. And so when I see people going to these superhero movies, I think what they're doing is, on an unconscious level, reaching for heroes. They're reaching for wanting to see imagery more about solutions and resolutions and virtues, qualities and values of the human spirit that reach beyond the problem, the obstacle, the challenge, the adversity, and say, you know what, the human spirit can transcend all of that, can transform beyond these inner hurdles, whether they're within us or literally surrounding us. So yeah, if you exist inside of a prison, you look outside of the window. If you see somebody standing outside of the prison living their best life, isn't it human nature to look to that and say, I want that for myself. I yearn to free myself from this experience. That's one thing. For me, sarcasm actually has just exacerbated the difference between what someone's saying and how someone's saying it, which is, there is a surface structure to language, a surface structure to communication, and then there's the deeper meaning that we're actually attempting to communicate that rests underneath it. And in that gap between what I'm saying and what I'm actually attempting to communicate, there can be a very small gap, depending upon how good a communicator you are, or there can be a very large gap. And for me, I think sarcasm is a play in that gap. And for a lot of people, it might be just a coping mechanism to deal with a harsh reality, to deal with a truth that their own consciousness may not be ready to meet yet. So they can talk about it in a jestful way or a jovial way in an attempt to process the experience of it. But that's just my 2 cents on it. And as an American, I would say I'm nowhere near close enough to being as masterful as the British are when it comes to sarcasm.
I agree with that. I think sarcasm is far more damaging than helpful.
In what way, Bob?
I think that if you say something that is the opposite of what you mean, that the subconscious is going to process that differently than if you say what you mean. And that's disadvantageous to the communication. it's a way of evading responsibility for what you're actually trying to say. At least that's my take on it. Yeah.
But it sounds to me, Bob, like that based on what you're saying, that that may affect communication, but within the individual, what do you think is the thing that causes people to want to lean on it?
Oh, I think that the motivation for it is an evasion of responsibility for who you are and what you really think. It's a way of saying something with leaving yourself a back door to deny the significance of it. Oh, well, I didn't really mean it. I was just joking. And my answer to that is there's many a truth spoken in jest. So I don't accept sarcasm as a substitute for truth.
Can I ask you, Bob, do you believe there to be a positive purpose behind sarcasm then? Or what might be its positive utility?
I do think that there are limited circumstances where the use of sarcasm can inspire humor that actually improves the communication, but one has to be extremely selective in recognizing those moments and use sarcasm only when it improves the communication without damaging the communication.
And I also think it depends on the people who are communicating. Some people have a specialized form of communication, different kinds of pet languages and different kinds of understanding of one another, where sarcasm may be more acceptable and where one person doesn't get offended by the other. I think at the end of the day, though, besides just trying to figure out what the other person means when they're expressing themselves using sarcasm, maybe to try to understand ourselves as well and try to realize, why are we reacting in this certain way to their sarcasm? Because like you guys talked about earlier, self-understanding and realizing that if someone's using sarcasm and it hurts me or it offends me, maybe there's also some things I need to work on myself. Maybe I'm even misinterpreting them from a communication standpoint. And I'm not saying what you guys are suggesting is wrong in terms of analyzing that particular individual. It's definitely, that's definitely the case, but it's also good to look internally and try to work through those particular issues as well. Now, personally, people, even me, I get really annoyed when people get sarcastic sometimes, because I'm a very frank, straightforward person. I'm not very good at sarcasm. Sometimes I think sarcasm can be a learned skill for people. They do it so often, they get really good at it. I get really good at trying to tell the truth and trying to understand people. So it does kind of act like almost a pincer movement on their behalf, or some kind of counter thrust in terms of their behavior. So then I try to start figuring out, why are they doing this and why am I feeling this way? And then try to come to terms with them. But then I lean back on Marshall Rosenberg's idea, and then I just try to assess their needs. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what it's about. If I can figure out their needs, maybe I'm able to cut through the sarcasm, because now I have an understanding of what they want. All human beings have needs. They get physiologically aroused. They enter fight or flight mode, and sarcasm may be a way to enter into fight or flight mode in a way that's safe in the cultural milieu that we live in.
I need to comment that my computer battery is about to die, so when I disappear from the screen, I will be back via my phone in moments. So don't be surprised when that happens.
We'll miss you, Bob.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Johnny.
Hey, Sterling, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Based on what you're talking about around that human need, is it possible with what you're saying that that sarcasm may also be used in order to communicate in what that person perceives as a safe way about their need, while letting out the fight or flight? Because that's been my experience. That I have a couple of friends, obviously, that are British, and whenever there's a really complicated or let's call it conflicting situation, challenging in nature, they go to sarcasm in order to let themselves out of that fight or flight mode. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were.
No, that's a possibility, like as a form of a ventilation to keep them from acting out in a way that may not be socially acceptable, or a way that's even more offensive than the sarcasm itself. I think that's a very strong possibility, bro, for sure.
Cool. And we lost Bob. Bob, come back. Bob.
All right, well, we'll proceed on to the second question, because we've got a short period of time here. So the second question was about what are some of the real examples of the potential of humankind that stick out to you? Do these reflect on the potential of the whole, or could they? And I'll just, for me, something like Wim Hof is a great example of somebody that shows, some really amazing human potential. But go ahead, Sterling, I'll let you start.
Yeah, there's a couple of different items that I'm thinking about in terms of human potential, but my main thought on human potential is this: there's a huge movement toward becoming more and more technologically advanced, but toward iterating in terms of the way that we interact with our environment and with the people around us, right? We have the transhumanist movement, people who believe that they can be technologically augmented, toward a greater self-understanding, toward a greater understanding of other people in the sense of using brain implants and those kind of things. And a lot of this stuff is considered still science fiction for a lot of people, but technologically we're moving forward very fast. And I really think that, and I know this doesn't strictly get into the psychology, but it's definitely related to it. And one of the people that I read that I really appreciated in this particular area is Ray Kurzweil. And Kurzweil had this idea that all the evolution is in terms of technology, or technology is in terms of evolution, is evolution by another means. So the more technologically advanced we become, the more able to connect and interact with the people around us, i.e. the internet, i.e. artificial intelligence, and all the different technological apparatuses that allow us to understand each other in a lot more cogent and coherent of a way. So I think technology is really pushing us forward in terms of our human potential. I mean, it's the ultimate human potential movement. Kurzweil had this idea in the Age of Spiritual Machines that the whole idea. I'm getting some feedback from somebody. Sorry, that's distracting.
Sorry, Bob, it's yours. So I'm just going to mute you.
Okay, I think that's better. So the idea is that eventually we're going to create artificially intelligent machines. We're going to dot the universe with a kind of intelligence that is going to be machine, but it's also going to be human. And I think that at the end of the day, this kind of technology, and there's a lot of fears and concerns here, we can get into that later if you want, but at the end of the day, this is going to allow us to become even more than we are now, in ways even potentially godlike. This was the idea that McKenna had about an eschaton, or some kind of strange attractor at the end of time pulling us toward it. Or in Kurzweil's mind, it's the creation of some type of God that was initiated by humankind. Someone actually asked him at an event one time if he believed in God, or if he thought that God existed, and he said not yet. So I think technology is really the ultimate human potential movement. But I do think the psychology plays into it, because in order to advance ourselves technologically, we also have to start to learn to understand each other a lot better. The better we understand each other, the better that we can imbue these artificial intelligence agents with compassion and empathy and the things that matter as well, to make sure we don't go off course and end up destroying ourselves in the process. Because it's going to happen. We're moving forward technologically, whether anyone likes it or not.
Go ahead, Johnny. Let me get your answer.
Man, I'm going to go a completely different direction. I'm going to go a completely different, although I love the direction you went. For me, I would say the greatest aspect of human experience that will allow us to continue being successful is our ability to predict. It's our ability to problem solve. In everything that we've studied on this planet, of all the living beings that we have on this planet, we are the only living being that is the ultimate problem solver. It doesn't matter what environment, what context you put humanity in, we will find a solution to the problem. So for me, that's the greatest aspect of what makes humans human. Yeah, we eat like every other being. Yes, we have excrement like every other, mammalian being. Yes, we procreate like every other being. But what makes us truly unique and different is our ability to look at time, our ability to even know that time exists. So for me, it's the dynamic between this body that we are essentially or inherently trapped in a 3D and limited experience, and this identification of a soul, our ability to look from the smallest micro and its relationship to the biggest macro and everything in between. And the fact that our consciousness seeks to want to know and to solve the problem of what does that mean for me? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for other living beings in the universe? Even, do they even exist? The fact that we can entertain these questions and wax philosophy on this is, for me, the greatest aspect of what makes us human, is that we can even entertain ideas we don't have experience of yet directly, because somebody gave us an idea of it. So the fact that we can have that, for me, is what rests at the root of what creates technology. It's the innovation, the desire to create reality from thought, from imagination, from pretend, that allows us to resolve, these problems. And so for me, as much as I stated the weakness of the human experience being that of our lack of awareness or ignorance, it can also simultaneously, within the same mechanism, lead to our desire to know, our desire to understand, our desire to seek what's more for us and our actual potential. And I don't see that ending anytime. So whereas other people are saying technology is going to destroy things and everything's going to blow up, I go, yeah, but the same mechanism within our minds that allows us to create the technology may very well help us to fuse between our body and our soul this connection from the micro to the macro, and we may innovate ourselves to evolve as fast as the technology does. So I look forward to that, and hope that humanity on a sociological level manages to combine virtue and value and love and compassion and these roots of the human spirit alongside our technological advances in the more physiological or biological realm.